The gliders, the largest ever built, were only slightly smaller than a present-day jumbo jet. They were given the appropriate name Gigant, giant. Incredibly, the prototype was ready just 14 weeks after the design was finalized. The test pilots, among them Hanna Reitsch, flew the aircraft from this single narrow cockpit 60 feet above the runway. A Junkers 90, one of the few four-engined aircraft the Germans possessed, towed the prototype Gigant on its first test flight at Leipzig. Halfway down the mile-long runway, hydrogen peroxide rockets were ignited to assist the hard-pressed Ju-90. The first hurdle, jettisoning the 2-ton undercarriage, was cleared without incident, and the Gigant was airborne. But Hanna Reitsch, after test flying the prototype, was far from impressed.
It was so primitively built that it was so difficult to fly. You needed so much strength. And you see, this, what is too hard for me in a 5 minutes flight, that is too hard for a strong man in a 1 hour flight. So I tried with this argument to convince Udit to stop it. But he didn't believe it, because Messerschmitt said, she is too small a little girl, but not a strong man for fighting. So don't believe her.
They didn't. The test flights continued, though Hanna Reitsch and other pilots confirmed that in addition to the heavy controls, the Junkers towplane was seriously underpowered and barely able to maintain flying speed on takeoff. Once airborne, the Gigant, despite its size, flew surprisingly well, though the controls, even for a strong man, were almost immovable. Hanna Reitsch found that she could fly the aircraft only by using the trim wheels, which must have made her landing approach critical. But she managed without obvious difficulty to land the huge glider, gently easing it down onto its unsprung skids. The landings being satisfactory, it was eventually decided to try to improve the takeoffs by returning to an original proposal by Messerschmitt himself of using 4 towing planes. In the event, only 3 were to be used, twin-engined Messerschmitt 110s, totaling 8,850 horsepower. Long steel tow cables were attached to the glider, and the Troika Schlepp, as it was called, began its first test flight. Takeoff was in many ways difficult, for despite the rocket assistance, the 3 towing aircraft were teetering on the edge of stalling. The whole operation called for extremely skilled, coordinated flying on the part of all the pilots concerned. The smallest error would have been disastrous. And disasters there were. On one test flight, the glider's rockets fired on only one wing, dragging the Troika together. The 3 tow planes and the glider crashed. 129 troops on board the glider were killed. Hanna Reitsch, on her second test flight, had trouble with the Troika Schlepp.
The left bomber, even when still being on the ground or just above the ground, went out. He had to release the cable, and 2 couldn't tow it alone. We had 6 rockets on the wing, which when they once were blowing, you could not stop them. So when you lost one towing bomber, also the right bomber was lost. I was hanging on one bomber that was like a little fly compared with my giant. And all 6 rockets were burning. I knew I couldn't stop it. I could get 150 50 feet height. Then the rockets were finished after 3 minutes or 4. And I knew the single toe bomber had to release me, otherwise he would. So I could just, when he released me, and I could release all 3 ropes, and so before the ground, I touched the ground. It was like this, but we had the good luck that it was only good luck, touched the ground when the ground makes such a wave. So one had broken his knees, another had a nerve shock, but you see, I was well, and only deeply thankful that nobody was killed. And I finished because I was so much against it, because it was too big.
As gliders, the Gigants were not a practical proposition, so they were fitted with 6 engines and a multi-wheel undercarriage to become the largest service transports in existence, and one of them was tested by Hanna Reitsch.
Oh, this was very simple to fly, you see. The engine did it.
A view not generally held by Luftwaffe pilots. These sticking plaster bombers, as the German soldiers disparagingly called them, proved easy prey for Allied fighters, and many were shot down.